So I'm going to mute. You guys will just go around. We can start with, I'm looking at my order and I see like Rachel and Summer, then Nan and Kelly and Jesse and Brandy and Leanne and Tracy. So whatever order you want, but we'll just make sure that we hear from everyone. Sound good? Any questions before? Oh, I see a lot of nods and all right, I think we're good. If there's any questions, just unmute and ask them, okay? But I'll mute myself.
I think when I'm working on my task, I know what I want to accomplish, but I keep playing around with the language and going back and forth. And it's like, is this really what I want? And trying to consider what I want and making sure that I'm having the right kind of language for the task. And is it going to accomplish what I want it to accomplish? So I'm like, maybe I need to write this paper first myself to really see what it is that I want my students to be able to do, and then make sure that the language is matching up.
Hey, Rachel, you're so visionary. Guess what you're going to do in 2 weeks? You're going to write in response to your task. I love it. We're I mean, not like the whole thing, but part of it. But we're actually going to spend the next few weeks just continuing to ask those questions that you're asking yourself. So you're at a beautiful place. That's awesome.
I also had a similar experience to Rachel. I'm working with the content that I'm completely uncomfortable with. Science, like reading the standards, just blows my mind. So I found that when we were picking text, we had to change the template. And then once we change the template, we have to change the standard. So like it's been really difficult getting the standard and the text and the content and the tasks to all mesh together to get your outcome, like Rachel just said.
I think sometimes it feels like this really complex puzzle, right? And as you keep trying to match up pieces, you're like, oh, not quite. Oh, this one was so close, right? You think it gets right. And when they start finally coming together, it feels really good. But hopefully as we do some of this work and start workshopping, you'll get some good thought partners in helping you make those connections and rethink things. Excellent, Brandy, thank you.
I'm kind of in the same line as these two girls. You know, when I was designing the task, I was aware that it was important that the task match the standards. So you're going from standards to task, you know, back and forth, making sure that it matches. And then, you know, is the task the outcome that you're going to want from the kid? So hopefully that's where I'm at, that it's working.
Yep. I think you guys are all in exactly the right place. It's kind of fun when you hear other people, you start to kind of doubt, wait, am I supposed to be this questioning at this moment? But everybody's there, right? That's why we get to spend 8 weeks just thinking about a task and not feeling like we're rushing through the whole module process. So we really can slow down and think about how those decisions fit together. Awesome. Thanks, Dan.
When I started looking at my standard, I noticed that there were several components, and I really had to kind of just pick one area for the task, because I didn't think it would cover the entire standard and all the components. So I had to sit down and think, which one is the most important component of the standard? And that was a little different for me, because when I do post tests and I teach, I cover every, part of the standard. But that was hard, and it took some tweaking on my task to do that. But I think I did.
Oh gosh, I realized I didn't mute. I'm sorry, Summer, for the background noise while you were talking. But that's awesome. Well, and that's what keeps them from being too big, right? And how do we really go deep and help build the thinking in different stages? That's exciting. And I think that really connects nicely with what Nan was saying about how do you use the standards in a meaningful way, right? To really drive that thinking work. Break it apart and decide what's the right bite, right? Nice. Okay, Angela, we're just doing a quick status check, having everybody go around and talk about what learning's been the most influential in their task design, or where you're at in the process, or wonderings or challenges that you're having, okay? So we still have, let's see, Kelly, Jesse, Leanne, Tracy, and Angela all to hear from. So we're about almost halfway through.
Okay. I'm basically the same with trying to find the standards. Like, I know what standards I want, but then when I read the task, I'm like, they don't really go together. So it's just trying to put the puzzle together to make your task go along with your standards. So basically the same.
You know, before we hear from everybody else, I want to try a little something. I think this will be interesting because I think so far the only person who's actually talked about the discipline that they're writing for has been Brandy when she said science. Let's go ahead and next to our name, let's rename ourselves as far as the discipline and the grade level that you're wanting to write your task for. Does that sound pretty good? And then we'll keep hearing from other people. But I think that'll be interesting because maybe we'll find some connections of people who are trying to find the right fit, you know, across our group. So I'll mute and we'll keep hearing from the rest of our folks.
I can't figure out how to change my name. I forgot. So I'll just tell you, the task I'm writing for is my AP Lang in composition. And what I'm struggling with is I'm afraid I'm trying to include too much stuff in there. So I'm trying to focus on the standards and also make it complex for those AP students. So right now I'm trying to maybe relook at my task and see if I don't need to narrow it down a little bit. So that's kind of where I'm at.
Excellent. Lane can be interesting because that can get really big. That'll be fun to think through with you. And I'm actually trying to focus on an AP Lit one, so we'll have to talk. Let's see, Leanne, Angela, Tracy.
I'm working with, my content is social studies, and the best part of the work that I've done so far is that my social studies teacher, she really knows her standards like inside and out. And I can't find it now. I was looking, but I read somewhere in some of our training about matching the standard words within our task and how it could be paraphrased, or I can't remember the other wording and I can't find it anywhere right now, but she was able to help me see that we did have a lot of her content in the task, but it wasn't necessarily the same words, but they meant the same. And since I didn't know those standards as well as she did, she could pick that out and I couldn't, but she was like, yeah, this means exactly the same thing, you know? So that was really eye-opening to me because she knows it so well, so much better than I do.
That is a great reflection. I've just put in the chat, do you think like that intention of the standard or something like that? I know that's probably not the word you were looking for, but isn't that exciting when you start to make those connections and build your understanding? Excellent. All right, Angela, you were Tracy.
I can go. So I picked a 10th grade ELA standard. We have a special ed teacher that just switched content areas from math to English. And so I wanted to find a way to support her work. I had originally picked the 3rd grade one, and I just saw somebody else had done that. I was like, well, I really need my life to be easier, not harder right now. And I'm a former high school English teacher. So, but we do have a social studies teacher that we're sending to an LDC training. And so I hope to work with her as she works through this process. So I work with all the teachers K through 12 in our district. So I figured I better start with what I knew and then I can branch out.
I think that's a really good strategy, right? Go deep in something you know, and then start figuring out the cognitive lift isn't so overwhelming at one time, right? Love it. All right. Well, we're going to start digging into some of these things as you're looking at how those puzzle pieces fit together and making these decisions. What's something to consider about when it comes to the text and really staying connected to your discipline in a meaningful way? And for that, I'm going to hand it over to Wayne, who's going to take us into some of that thinking work.
Great. Thank you, Kimba. And I'm really excited about some of the comments that have already been made as we think about what this is going to really look like, especially in certain disciplines and the conversations around science and social studies and even the parenting class. We know that what we are going to ask students to engage in, especially when we're looking at specific text, is going to look very different from one area to the next. And so that's a very exciting conversation for us to have. And so we want to start briefly by just kind of thinking about the shifts that are part of the standards work over the last several years. I know that many of you have been involved in that work. And so one of those shifts is really kind of looking at how we engage students in regular practice of complex text and also academic language. And as we think about what that would look like in each discipline, it may look a little different. And it should. Because if it's not different, then it really, especially in those other disciplines, it may look like we're just simply just doing ELA or we're doing reading and writing in a discipline, but it doesn't really look very discipline specific. And so I'm putting a question over in the chat box right now. The question is, what kinds of complex text should students be reading in your discipline? So as you think about those of you that are working with science or social studies or in a CT area, or even you think about like in your own ELA classroom, or the people that you're working with as you're coaching others, what should that text look like? So I'm interested in your thoughts on this as we think about how we engage students in particular types of text. So please share out, or if you want to, you can put a comment in the chat box.
Well, I'll just tell you the text that I've chosen. The text that I've chosen is a 17th century text by Benjamin Franklin, and it's where he writes from the perspective, the point of view of a woman. And so the text is going to be very complex for my AP kids because they've got to be able to understand that the author is not the person that's sharing the point of view. He's created this character. And so they've got to like unlayer it. It's going to be in several different layers. So that's one reason why I'm worried. It's first of all, it's a complex text because we don't talk that way anymore. And then second of all, it's got the layers of the, the author becoming this other character. So, that's why I'm afraid I'm having them do too much.
That's a very interesting text, right? But it looks like you've already thought about how you would bring students into that over multiple settings, looking for very different things. And so that, how you're going to get students involved in that text, how each opportunity to go into that text is going to look for different things. And so that's kind of exciting. It sounds like a very exciting thing that you're going to do with those students. And I'm sure that when they get in there, that's going to be exciting for them too. What are some other examples of how text may differ from one area to another?
If we're thinking with my students right now, we're getting ready to go into Hamlet and kind of looking at Shakespeare and we're thinking about the language, and that may vary a whole lot from history class, but we can still have some of the overlapping conversations. We can talk about time periods and things like that. But of course, I'm focused on the literature and the way that we're trying to come together to create meaning for my students, especially since we don't talk that way anymore. Like she said, that's going to be a challenging text for them, but it is something that they should be able to struggle through productively.
Mm-hmm. Right, Rachel, that's a great point. Even though you may use sometimes the same text in an ELA classroom and a social studies classroom, the viewing of that, how you're processing that, how you're thinking about that text can be very different with ELA and social studies, especially what questions you're considering, how you may facilitate or guide that thinking process can be very different. And so that's a great point, right? How you can really look at the same text through multiple lenses. And it may be that we're not using this the lens we're looking at through the disciplinary lens is going to be very different from one area to the next. What about other areas? What about science, or maybe even for some of our younger audiences?
I'm using a text on a woman who is fighting for democracy in modern day Burma, and a text that is about the the men who wrote the Declaration of Independence. And so the students I'm hoping that the students will pick up on how, even though modern day, she's still doing the same thing that those men were doing a long time ago, and they're fighting for the same things. I'm
interested. I know that a couple other people here also either doing social studies or at least working with social studies teachers. When you think about how Leanne is going to use that document about modern day Burma, what do you see as being sort of the big takeaway from using that document, that type of text?
I was hoping that it'd be more real world to them instead of talking about something that happened so long ago, that bringing it more current would, make more sense to them. They could relate to it more. I know it's Burma, it's not the United States, but with it just being, more today than, in a time period that they can't really relate to.
Yeah, but you're really going to focus on those big themes, right? You're going to be focused on those themes of independence and governance, and those things that are still true today in Burma as they were 200 some odd years ago in colonial conversations. And so that's really neat that you're choosing a text that is a modern day example of these themes that really sort of run throughout history. And so that's a great thing that you're choosing. It's really exciting. I'm excited to see where this task goes. One of the other shifts with the standards of the last several years is how we engage our students in disciplinary writing. We want to look at is what modes of writing allow students to explore significant disciplinary content in a way that's grounded in textual evidence. And so as we think about what writing looks like in all disciplines, what are things that are sort of important to understand, but also, as Nan mentioned earlier, to make sure that we really get at the outcome that we want from our students?
I know, like, here at Owsley, we've kind of been having a conversation. We're a very small district, so we kind of all talk together about what writing looks like in our classrooms and how writing is so similar in each one of our classes and how we can really use it, because several of them are familiar with LDC, and how we can really use it to talk about that content. And so me and the science teacher have like a running game going with our kids. We're like, are we doing the same thing? Does it look the same way? And they're like, well, yeah, it kind of does. We're accomplishing different things, but at the same basic level, they evidence, and that evidence is crucial. In science, it might be their own work, and it might be maps and data, but for me, it's that textual-based evidence, and then they realize they have to have a rationale. And so they're going from one class, and they're having the same conversation in another class, and it's helping their writing so much because they realize that it may look a little different, but at the basic, it's the same.
Oh.
So it's been powerful. I've really enjoyed that.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. That sounds very exciting. I think we all want to come down and visit your school in Owsley County and see what that looks like there. Have others experienced the same thing, where that it really, like, even though you're what you may expect out of the individual writing piece may be different from one discipline to the next, but really there are some sort of overarching components or themes of that seem to be helping out across disciplines? If not that question, what are some ways in which each discipline may approach writing differently? How are some ways in which we may see that writing in this one discipline may look a little different than writing in another discipline, especially as we're grounding our writing in text evidence?
The way you frame that question now, Wayne, is really making me think of some of the conversations we had when we were all together, be it whichever launch day you were at, was thinking about how we communicate ideas differently in different disciplines, the way we structure it. Remember in that paper of Dr. Olson's, where she talks about how thesis first versus thesis last, or kinds of evidence we use, and some of those things. I think for a while, ELA got very stuck in narrative writing as being so important, or certain structures of essay being the norm for every single class, but that might not be the way every class communicates, every discipline communicates. I don't know. That's what I was thinking about.
Yeah, thanks, Kimba. That's a great point. And if we remember from our 2-day kickoff, we looked at some very specific examples of science and how science writing may look very different than in an ELA classroom in some cases, right? But still, as Rachel mentioned, students will still be identifying a claim and supporting that with evidence from the text. And so it's a very nice way of looking at how there are some common areas among disciplines, but also they can look
I
very
think the
different.
lens from which they write probably changes the most. If I'm thinking about my classroom, they're literary critics. When they go to science, they're researchers. You know, it really just depends on what they're doing, what the task is asking them to do, that I think the writing most changes. It's just through that lens and the purpose of their writing.
Mm. Yeah.
And Kimba, I couldn't help but think about that grant that the young kids wrote, one of the examples we looked at, that RFA, because when I saw Wayne's question, I immediately went to my appeal paragraphs, point of paragraph, evidence, explanation, link back to your thesis statement. But, you know, when we think about those disciplinary areas, I think about science class and the need for charts. And then I thought, well, not just science class. Then I thought of those grants, and I thought of the circle grant and how we presented evidence in charts and in narrative form and all these different ways. And the more I think about that, the more I'm thinking grant writing pushes you to know so many different ways that I really want to bring that to the table with all the teachers that I work with and say, hey, think about a grant proposal. It could be whatever content area you're working in, and they could still learn about the content. So that.
Angela, that's such a great way to move us into the third big shift. And if we are engaging students in those types of writing, then what should reading look like in those classes, right? So if we're looking at RFAs in a science class, if we're looking at different types of data or statistical information in a variety of classes, or if we are looking at like those 17th century English writers, then what kind of skills are students going to really need that are discipline specific to engage in those types of texts to be able to actually get that text evidence?
One thing is that they'll need to be able to read the text. So they'll need to be, on their reading level, on their individual reading level. And it has to represent and showcase what the standard is asking them to do, or the task is asking them to do. I mean, when I give them the Time for Kids magazines, they have to understand what text features are and how what they mean and how they enhance the reading. And there's just a variety of different underlying skills that they're going to have to do to even be successful in the task that we create.
Thank you, Summer. That's so important, right? Identifying those key skills that are going to be essential to understanding the text, but also being able to carry that over into the writing. What other thoughts do you have around the types of reading skills that students are going to need?
Well, I work with little people. And, a lot of the little people are reading for the plot, what's going on in the beginning, middle, and the end of the story. What's going on with these characters? How do you define sure? They do that a lot as far as your ELA classes. And then obviously, like Rachel said, when you're in science and social studies, it's different. You're reading for facts. You're answering specific questions, looking for certain information. And in our reading classes too, it's always important that they know the different genres that they're reading. We think that's important.
Right.
What am I reading? Am I reading a fiction? Am I reading a fantasy?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have to agree with that. And I want to come back to something somebody else said. Text features plays a major role when we talk about these disciplinary content areas, because if you're reading a novel, you may not see any pictures whatsoever. Or is it to highlight a piece of information? Is it to expand your understanding of the information? And so I think both of you are saying the exact same thing. You're just saying it from your grade level perspective, but it's hard to identify exactly what content. I know they're going to need vocabulary, whatever content area it is, they're going to need vocabulary support. But other than that, text features I think are critical. And I think it's one of the areas that we don't do a good enough job even to teach them the features of a textbook. And so to me, that would be a critical area.
Yeah, it's a great point you're making, and so we know that those features can look very different. As we looked at in our 2-day kickoff, they can look very different in kindergarten versus an ELA secondary classroom, or even a science text, right? And so it brings up the question: what is authentic text? What does an authentic text really look like? And so I'm putting a link over in the chat box. It's a very brief half-page article that really looks at authentic text. So what I ask that you do is just take about a minute or so here, click on that link or open that link and read through that text that talks about what is authentic text. And after you've had a chance to read that, we'll just do some brief discussion. So I'm curious of what your takeaway is from that brief article. So that the article that really looks at the question, what is authentic text? And Tracy, unfortunately, she doesn't have video or audio, but she's typed in the chat box over there information if it isn't in a subheading, etc. So thoughts or takeaways from the article on authentic text?
I think I like that it notes that it doesn't even have to be necessarily text. It could be audio files. It could be a lot of different media forms. It doesn't necessarily have to be just the written word. My sophomores are looking at the This I Believe series. I think it was on NPR for a while. It was written like in 1954. The girl that wrote it and then shared that on the radio was about 16 years old. And so for them, it's very authentic. They got to listen to it, got to listen to her actually say it aloud and those kind of things. And I think that helped them a whole lot to get a feel for the time period and what she was saying and her convictions and stuff. So the fact that it doesn't just have to be text, it can be audios, virtual tours.
Mm-hmm. Other takeaways from that brief article?
You know, it kind of makes you wonder why textbook companies don't do a little bit more of this. You know, the real world articles or whatever it might be. We have a few, you know, in our anthologies or our textbooks. You know, maybe once every couple chapters, you'll see some kind of article or some kind of information. But as far as a whole, this kind of writing is really not in our textbooks, in my opinion. So maybe we need to create new textbooks, guys. We can get rid.
Yeah, that's a good idea. So, you know, as Kimba is getting ready to move us forward here, these are great conversations that kind of help us as we think about our task, right? And as we think about moving forward with our task and what text we're going to choose and how we're going to really look to make sure those texts really get us at the outcomes that we want. So Kim, I'm going to hand this back over to you if you're ready.
Yes.
I don't know if you've ordered Starbucks yet or not.
I do have some coffee. However, I keep watching the chat and having conversations, and there's been so much great thinking and reinforcement of everything that's going on. So what I'd like to do is with this thinking work of how do we get these kind of authentic texts in our students' hands. And what's really exciting is when you guys were talking about the text that you're using and how you're thinking about complexity with your task, I mean, there were tons of authentic texts that you guys were talking about and how to really build that in. I want to take a look at some starter tasks to think about how starter tasks help us to make those decisions a little bit easier. The other piece from earlier that I really want to connect all this to when we take a look at some of these and what makes a quality task really work is that earlier many of you were talking about grappling with the smorgasbord, for lack of a better expression, of decisions that you had in front of you, right? Like which pieces you wanted to put together how. One of the things with starter tasks is you all are starting to support teachers moving forward in different ways. How could you use that as a way to lessen the decisions that they have to make? So maybe they are spending a lot more of their time really digging into maybe what would be the right text, or how I move forward and get a text that's going to be more meaningful for my students or more relevant to my discipline, or to the Burma example, something that's more relevant to our time period that they can connect to this thinking that I want them to do and not feel like they have to make all those decisions at once. And so what we're going to do is jump into some breakout groups and talk about and take a look at a couple of starter tasks. And then when we come back out, there's a couple of slides that I'll show you about what makes a starter task work and how that all fits together. But let's take a minute and look at some and unpack them, because I feel like everybody's kind of in this really good grapple with it place. So I'm going to go ahead and open up a couple of breakout groups, and you should see a message pop up on your screen to join it. So go ahead and join the breakout groups. All right, we all made it, it looks like. Let's see. When I left the room earlier, Summer was trying to get over. Let me see. She's still not quite joined a room yet. Let me see if I can get her to go. I wanted her to come in here. Let me see if I can get her. Summer might be having some technical issues. I know I feel like I'm having technical issues today. All right. So we're going to take a look at a starter task together and kind of see this starter task collection. And so let me grab the link to the collection really fast. And I'm going to put that in the chat and have you open it. And then I'm going to share screen. And I really apologize for all of the noise behind me. Okay, here we go. In the chat. I feel like we've lost Summer though. I'm worried about her. Making it back in. Okay, so see that link? That link should take you to this starter task collection. And I'm going to share my screen with that now. All right. So many of us are ELA in this group. I know not quite everybody in here, but I was thinking we could take a look at a couple of, look at an ELA one and then look at a social studies one and kind of talk through them and what makes them work. Does that feel like that would work for everybody? Perfect. All right. So the starter task collection is divided into secondary and elementary, ELA, science, social studies. And what it does is it provides a really concrete example of where the standards are working together in a meaningful way. And I just realized my tabs were a little bit out of order. So if you click on the secondary ELA starter task, you can see how they're arranged. So here's a 7th grade example, so grade 7. And one of the standards that's really meaningfully tied into this is RL2. And so you can use that as a starting point if you know RL2 is one of the standards that you're trying to drive at. Here's another example for 11th through 12th grade and RL4, or 9 and 10, RL6, right? And so it's giving you some really nice examples. Let's go ahead and look at this 6th grade one. It's RL4, grade 6 through 8, and just talk through what we see in it. Does that sound good? So if you click on this starter task, ELA, RL4, impact of word choice on tone, it's about the lottery, uses that text. So I see I'm in here, Angela's in here. Go ahead and take a minute and click on that. If you're having any trouble following my pathway because I jumped screens, I started with that starter task link, secondary ELA starter tasks, and then I scrolled down till I saw this impact of word choice on tone. So there's still just a couple of us in here. I'll just put the link directly into the chat if that makes it any easier. Use this. All right. So anybody having issues getting to that?
I feel like I have that pulled up, but then I don't see.
It, Rachel, then it could just be my wonderful Wi-Fi issues that are happening right now because I am at Target. Target.
I'm at the one that says starter task ELA RL4 grade 6 through 8. Yeah. Yep.
Yep.
I have the right.
Yeah, you have the right one. Leanne, do you have it open? Are you good? I just put the link for it in the chat. Go ahead and try that. See if that helps. There we go. Perfect. Still don't know why you're not in there, Rachel. That's so weird, but that's okay. As long as you're looking at the right one, we're fine. Kelly, are you able to get in there? Okay, perfect. So we're going to go down 6th grade. Task, informational explanatory. How does Shirley Jackson's choice of words and phrases in the lottery affect the tone of the story? After reading The Lottery by Shirley Jackson, write a literary analysis in which you analyze the impact of word choice on the story's tone. Support your discussion with evidence from the text. Include multiple key examples from the text in your response. So if I was to use this as a starter task, what about it makes 6-4 pretty solidly used in there? Go ahead and unmute and tell me, where do you see the thinking work of 6-4 in the task? I'm going to try to mute too, so you don't have to keep hearing my background noise. But you all unmute, okay?
Well, it's talking about determine the meaning of words, and then in the task, it's analyze the impact of word choice. Is that what you're asking us to do? Look at the standard and then look at the task?
You got it, 100%. Yeah, excellent. So if I was a teacher and I wanted to use this as a starting point, but I don't want to teach the lottery, or I have a different text that I have to use, what am I going to be looking for in a text if I want to use it with this standard and this kind of thinking?
You're still looking for word choice that leads to our understanding of tone. No matter what text you choose, you could use this as a great template.
So I just have to make sure I'm finding some kind of text that does that, right? There's something in it that's happening that really reflects tone, and the word choice really helps show that for students. Probably wouldn't want to get one that's a vague example, especially for 6th grade, right? I'd want it to be pretty clear and help support them in seeing that. Do you think there's another standard that I could give to really lift this, depending on my students and what the thinking work I want them to do?
Well, they have to use the textual evidence. They can't just say, oh, it has words and phrases. You got to pull out specific words and phrases, and you almost have to tell what the connotations are that come with it. What's that in emotional baggage and things like that. This is exactly what I just changed mine to. I'm using the Gettysburg Address, and I'm doing, why was that speech so monumental? The little play on words with that. But it's one of the most memorable speeches, and Lincoln says in it, we'll soon forget these words, but we haven't. We've never forgotten these words. So this is exactly what I picked. I only just put the Gettysburg Address in there. And RI, not RL. Yeah.
There you go. Well, and then the other thing is with the Gettysburg Address, if you're doing it in social studies, you can work in the content in a different way, right? And build out your focus standard cluster that way. The other thing that we could do here is when we think about why do some of those tone words really matter in this text? I think about lottery, and to understand the tone of the story, isn't that really connected to theme?
In this piece, definitely. It's one of my favorite all-time pieces. I loved it when I was in school myself, and I love teaching as a teacher. But yeah, you don't see this coming. The tone of the piece early on, you don't see this coming. It's a genius piece for that reason, I think.
Ooh, so you could even pair it with a structure standard, right? With how it's structured. And when you reread it the second time, you see all these tone words a little bit differently that you're like, oh, there's all these hints and I totally missed them, right? And that could be super interesting too. So what if we were to take this as a starter task and then start playing around with how do we want to lift the thinking for our kids? If I was, instead of to use RL1, what if I was to pair it with RL3 or RL5? How could I really play around with this in a cool way?
Mm-hmm.
And it could be a really nice base for deeper ELA thinking. It could be a great base for social studies thinking, to Angela's example, right?
Mm-hmm.
It could be a great base for a lot of different places when you're thinking about how words and phrases are used in that text.
And what it reveals about character. You could do a whole thing on, you could take this to character development and what it shows with it.
Oh yeah, definitely. Go
And
ahead.
that's what, I'm sorry, but that's what happens in good literacy instruction. You use a text for multiple standards because they know that one text that you're using, and then you show them all of these different things that you find in that one text. That's part of good literacy instruction, what we're talking about right now.
I agree. My kids read the Declaration of Independence so many times that they probably had it memorized because we read it for multiple reasons. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Wonderful. So let's take that thinking and take a look at a social studies example. And I'm getting that message that says my internet connection is unstable. So if my audio is all over the place, I am so sorry. I'm going to go ahead and go back to, hold on. I tried to have them open already. So I'm going to go to these secondary social studies starter tasks. And I'm going to click into this collection, which then gives me a really cool list like this. And I'm actually, there's this Hamilton one that's a lot of fun, just FYI, you guys, if you want to share that with teachers. Oh my gosh. I'm going to go to this grade 11th US history one. It's kind of towards the bottom. And it's getting at that RH6 because shucks, 6 point of view. I mean, that's so crucial in social studies, right? So if we open up this one, comparing two authors' points of view, claims, and reasoning on the same topic, and I scroll down, let's go ahead and look at the way that reading standard falls into here and talk about it as a starter task. I'm going to mute and give you a chance to just kind of read for a second.
I'm not there. I don't know where we are.
That's okay. Can you see my screen that I'm sharing?
Yeah, I'm in I clicked on LDC library.
So you have to then search the starter task to get back there. I just went back to that same link from in the chat. So you could use that link too.
Mm-hmm.
But for right now, just go ahead and read it off of my screen if that's easier.
Okay.
Because you should see it after reading Lyndon B. Johnson's. Can you read it good enough or no?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Perfect. Oh, hold on. All that darn noise again. I'm going to mute myself. But as soon as you guys start seeing a connection between the standard and the task, go ahead and just chime in.
I think the RH6 is it's clearly seen because you're looking at two different people's perspective. So not do you just have one president, but you have another, and you're kind of going back and forth in between their opinion on that same kind of topic. And so I think 6 is really well integrated into the assignment.
Well, when you think about that, Rachel, could you use this with a variety of other topics depending on what you were teaching in your curriculum? Is that valuable thinking to have students do in a social studies class about different views on the same historical event or topic?
Absolutely. I mean, I think even for ELA, of course, that's a great thing to be able to do, is to consider multiple perspectives. And so having two different perspectives on that, I think, is valuable work.
And that's kind of the idea of the way some of these tasks work together when you can see that evidence of that reading standard thinking is how does it support the disciplinary thinking that I care about, right? I could explore a lot of different historical concepts with this approach. And just instead of it being Lyndon B. Johnson and Ronald Reagan, right? Could I get 2 other texts, right, on another important theme in historical thinking or government or ethics or anything, right? Even I could probably even shift this into a science thinking if I needed to. It's about that deeper thinking and the way people present ideas. Other thoughts? I saw you kind of shaking your head, Leanne, agreeing, or Kelly or Angela. We got a few seconds. Feel free to unmute and then we'll go to the other room.
I was just agreeing that, I mean, the same thing that you said, pretty much. I mean, you could take a lot of different things in social studies or history class and change it out for those 2 texts.
And they kind of hit
teachers during
where
seminar
is going to be, because I'm really going to be focusing in on point of view and how it affects the reader. Whose perspective are we listening?
We had 2 science teachers do dueling scientists. This would have worked perfect for them. And they offered each one's perspective. So this would have.
Ooh, I love that. So a cool way to use it for ELA, right? And just kind of shift how you, the audience part. Oh, everybody's been kicked back. Here we come. All right. So I know in our group, we had a lot of conversation about starter task. I think I can hear the lag in my audio. I'm sorry, you guys. About what makes starter tasks work. A couple things I want to show you just as we close out and we wrap up for this week. I'm going to share my screen really quick, show you a couple slides about starter tasks. I think this is a lot of the conversation that we have, right? There are these discipline-specific annotated examples. If you look in the comments, which I know in our group we didn't get a chance to, but in the comment bubbles of each of these starter tasks, they give you some advice, suggestions on ways to annotate, to adapt them. The idea is that starter tasks start with your standards. They help streamline the task design by eliminating all the decisions, giving you a starting place when you're thinking about standards. But they can also support common task implementation. So if I'm part of a social studies team in high school, and I use the social studies starter task around point of view, could we have very different content used with that, but then come together and talk about student thinking in a meaningful way? So some possibilities. I got the little message saying that my internet connection is unstable. So if that made no sense, I apologize. Hopefully it at least came across clearly. So starter tasks are about taking all of those design entry points and helping to eliminate some of those decisions, give you a starting place. So for teachers, can help make their first task design not so overwhelming. And it can help you really think about ways to start with the standards as your anchor. So this week, as you look at your own tasks and are thinking about next steps with them, what you're gonna do is you're gonna have a partner. Do you guys hear that awful echo with my like repeat drag? Does the audio just sound horrible to you?
Just every now and then.
Okay. Sorry. So you're going to have a partner and you're going to actually review each other's tasks and give each other feedback using those comment bubbles this week. In the follow-up email, we're going to partner you up with someone. So it's going to be really important that you put your task in the collection so everybody can see each other's work. And all of that will be in the email, links that you need, reminders of all those steps and what your partner list is. So we'll try to set you up for success. We have a resource of some responsive coaching questions that can help you think through your task, but could also be really great questions that you might want to ask your partner based on what you're seeing is in his or her task and going through it. Wayne will put that link in the chat so you have it, but we'll also have that in the follow-up email as well this week. But what I'd really like to do to close out is do a slightly different final word whip rather than being just a final word. What I'd love to hear is just, what's your takeaway from some of your thinking today? Maybe it's about the starter task. Maybe it's a little more than just a word or a phrase. Maybe it's a sentence. Maybe it's about authentic text. But go ahead and pause for a minute, reflect, post that in the chat. I'm going to wrap up a little bit early so we have time to really read each other's, because we didn't get a chance to really debrief after those breakout groups. But we'll just keep that conversation going in the chat. Feel free to answer in response to what each other posts, and Wayne and I will stay on for a few minutes afterwards, but we really want to thank you for a great and thoughtful session today. This is awesome. And if you hate typing, go ahead and unmute. I never mind unmuting. Oh man, I can't help but to call out Leanne's really quick. I can't tell you how many times I've myself looked into the library or have supported others where if they don't see their text or their topic, they're like, oh, there's nothing here for me. And it's like, wait, there is. How do you like just shift it so it meets your needs as long as the standard thinking is what you want, right? Total shifts our thinking of how to use resources and how to adapt resources in a meaningful way. And it opens up so much. Y'all are amazing. Can't wait to start really digging into your tasks in the next couple of weeks. Thank you so much again for a great session. Have a good day, you guys. All right, I'm going to hit stop record.